Greetings, citizens. Hey you, beautiful, creepy little human being. You welcome to my channel and welcome to today's Morbid makeup video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy we were able to find each other on this cute, wonderful little earthly rotation. My name is Brittany or Bradderstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be talking about the murder of David Octolone, a boy who was killed on his 17th birthday by a friend of his, a fellow 17-year-old named Matthew Milat. Matthew Milat, that might sound familiar, and that's because that is the nephew of the most notorious serial killer in Australia's history, Ivan Milat, the backpack killer. But quick, before we get started, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out new videos every week, and I'd love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, you. Do it. Join us, join us, join us. One of us, one of us, one of us. And you can also follow me on Instagram if you want. It's Bradderstein, just like here. Okay, now that we're done with that business, the story. So, Matthew Milat. I had never heard of Matthew Milat until one of my subscribers, Miss Burgundy Baby, suggested that I look into him and his life and his crimes, and in looking into him, I found out about his uncle, Ivan Milat, and that's why Monday's video was on Ivan, because I felt like you needed to know of Ivan first, and then I did this video because I wanted you to have like a nice little Merry Christmas video, so this is going up on Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas if you celebrate it. And I fell just into a giant Milat-sized hole in looking into both of these cases. In addition to finding both cases terribly interesting, I also found that somehow they were both completely underreported, which is kind of crazy to me after learning about Ivan, and if you saw that video, you know, and then learning that his nephew went on to kill somebody as well. I was like, how are we not talking about this? So hence this video. I like to put out into the world what I wish existed in the world. That's just how I operate. So come, gather around, and let me tell you the story about David Octolone, the boy who was tragically murdered on his 17th birthday by one of his oldest childhood friends, who just happens to be Matthew Milat, the nephew of the most notorious serial killer in Australian history, Ivan Milat, the backpack killer. Holy wow, that was a mouthful. That's what she said. So David Octolone, given the nickname Octo by his friends, was born November 20th, 1993, making him a Scorpio. David was raised by his grandmother Sandra and his grandfather, whose name was also David Octolone, and they lived on like a nice size of piece of land, kind of like a farm, not really, but it was a little farm-ish with like birds and horses in Bargo, Australia. David was an easy kid to raise. He was a shy and a sweet boy when he was growing up. He would always make handmade Mother's Day cards for his grandma on Mother's Day, and he'd give them to her with like fresh picked flowers that he got while he was out playing in the morning. He was just like a sweet boy. He was just super nice, so it came as no surprise that as he got older, he became a super popular and well-liked kid amongst the peers in his age group. David was that friend that everyone wanted to hang out with, and his grandparents' house kind of became like the hub, the hangout hub where David would go with all of his friends, and his grandmother was very used to sometimes having to whoop up an extra 8 meals for all the random kids that David decided to bring home for dinner without telling her in advance. It would just happen like that in their family. And honestly, David's life, like him and his friends, the dynamic there reminds me so much of my life growing up, because my house was that house. My mom, my poor mother, she would have to be prepared to just make a bunch of food for a bunch of little random little shithead kids, like on a drop of a dime all the time. So she'd always have like a big meal with a ton of bread and butter just in case I brought home any of my bunch of friends that I had in my teenage years. Can't relate now. Got no friends now, but in my teenage years, you know, that's how I was too. But David was really close with his grandparents. He was close with both Sandra and David Sr., so they didn't mind doing this for them. They liked having the energy and the chaos, and you know, just that energy around the house was something that they didn't mind and that they enjoyed doing, because they loved David, so they loved his friends. So among these kids who would often show up at the Octolone household was a boy named Matthew Milat. Milat or Milat. I know in my Ivan video I went back and forth between Milat and Milat. I think it's Milat, but Matthew Milat. Matthew started coming around the house when David and him were both little boys, and they were good friends, you know. Matthew wasn't as popular or well-liked as David. He wasn't as outgoing. He didn't have that kind of personality. He was more of like a loner, but David didn't mind. He was friends with him. That was his friend. He stuck around him even when he got, you know, a little weird and was less liked than David. He was just that kind of kid. He hung out with everybody, and he was nice to anybody who wanted to be his friend. And though the two met when David and Matthew were young, they stayed friends up until their teenage years. So Matthew Milat was actually given the name Matthew Muleman at birth. It was his mom's boyfriend's last name. But as Matthew got a little older, turned into like an angsty teenager, he started to kind of resonate more with his uncle and kind of wanted to have that name connected to him, so he ended up changing his name to Matthew Milat when he was a teenager. I think he was around 14. Okay, now real quick, just in case, because I'm assuming that all of you have seen last week's video, if you didn't, first off, highly suggest, because it's incredibly interesting, but Cliff Notes version. Matthew's great uncle, Ivan Milat, is a serial killer, the most notorious serial killer in Australia's history. He murdered a bunch of people and hid their bodies in the Belanglo State Forest and was convicted of these crimes in 1996. For some quick backstory. Okay, so Matthew, getting older, becoming a teenager, getting obsessed with his uncle. Changed his name so that he could have that legacy attached to him and people would know, like, that was my uncle, right? So he's doing that, and it's kind of weird because, like, Matthew didn't have any interaction with his uncle. It wasn't like they were close growing up. He hadn't talked to him in years since he was a kid, but for whatever reason, as he got older, he became obsessed with his uncle and obsessed with the Belanglo State Forest where, you know, the crimes took place. Okay, so we're gonna fast forward a little bit. Matthew Milat is now 17 years old. He's moved away, he's found a job, he's left school, he's even fathered a child. So he's, you know, doing the thing, living the normal good life for a while when he decides, you know, I'm done with this, I wanna go back to Bargo. So he goes back to Bargo and he starts looking up his old friends, and of those old friends that he starts linking up with is David Octolone. Matthew started going over to David's grandparents' house again, started, you know, just circulating and showing his face, and Sandra noticed that Matthew now, with these extra years on him, just seemed different. He seemed creepy and he seemed a bit more aggressive, so she warned David that he might not want to spend as much time with his childhood friend as he was and as he used to. But you know kids, they don't want to listen to what their grandparents or their parents have to say about their friends, so David still hung out with Matthew. And now at this point we're going to get in our handy dandy time machine. We're going to fast forward a little bit to November 20th, 2010, which was, you know, just 10 years ago now. It was David's 17th birthday and also David's last day alive. So David must have known that something was going on, that there was some rift between him and Matthew, because he had a very creepy and chilling conversation with his grandmother Sandra on the day that he died. And in hindsight, my God, this must be terrible for her to even remember and know that this conversation happened. Apparently on his birthday, David mentioned to his grandmother that somebody was going to kill him. Obviously, you know, Sandra was taken aback and she tried to ask him, like, okay, but like who? Who is gonna kill you? And he wouldn't answer, and he didn't seem super serious, sort of like made it as like a casual comment, and she just tried to reassure him, like, David, listen, like who's gonna actually kill you? Who's gonna risk their life and their freedom just to take you off this planet? And he's like, you know, you're right, no big deal. And the day went on as normal. But in hindsight, knowing what we know, and knowing what she now knew, like, that's gotta just, I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine. Her last, like her comment to him being, who in Bargo would kill you? And the two of them laughing it off and making it like it wasn't a big deal, but they were just both so wrong, and by the end of that day, he would be dead. So after that totally odd conversation with Sandra, David's birthday, you know, went on normally without a hitch. They had their cake and they opened their presents and he spent time with his family. And then towards the end of the day, he told them that he was gonna leave. He was gonna go meet up with Matthew Milat and a couple other friends. They were gonna drink some beer and celebrate his birthday. You know, just have some fun, and he said his goodbyes. You know, he promised to call, and he left to head to town to meet up with the boys. And unfortunately, watching him walk out that door would be the last time his family would ever see him alive. The boys, 17-year-old David Octolone, 17-year-old Matthew Milat, an 18-year-old friend named Cohen Klein, and another friend named Chase Day. I couldn't find out his exact age, but in interviews he looks to be about the same age as the other boys. They all met up at their normal place in town. It was like this little picnic bench area right off of a main road, and they were all hanging out, and then Matthew suggested, hey, why don't we go to the Belangolo State Forest. Apparently, Matthew seemed totally normal on this drive to the Belangolo State Forest, calm even, and the boys made the 30 or so minute drive to the forest and arrived there at about 9 p.m. Now, if you saw my last video, you'll understand and recognize the Belangolo State Forest and recognize the particular significance that bringing David to this particular spot would have held for Matthew, because this is the exact place that several years ago his uncle brought several people to torture, murder, and leave their bodies to rot like trash. Once they arrived at the forest, dubbed the Forest of Death by Ivan Milat's, or due to Ivan Milat's crimes, Matthew and the friend Cohen Klein got out of the car and they went to the trunk and they started like doing something at the trunk of the car, and then they beckoned David to join them. Chase Day had been waiting in the car with David. It was at this point that for 15 straight minutes, David was subjected to torture and horror that I can't even imagine. I cannot imagine how terrifying the last minutes of this poor boy's life were. If, like, David's last minutes on this earth are honestly just unthinkable. David was tortured and terrified. Matthew screamed at him, threatened him, made him lay in the dirt, all while hitting him 3 times in the abdomen with an antique double-headed axe that he had brought with him for the planned attack. All the time this is happening, David is screaming and crying and begging for Matthew to stop, and Matthew is screaming at him to keep his effing name out of David's effing mouth, because apparently he thought that David Octolone had ratted on him for stealing or something. And while this is happening, Cohen Klein, 18-year-old Cohen Klein, is filming the entire attack on his cell phone. Chase Day, who apparently had no idea that this was the plan, he just happened to be with them and got brought along, realized what was happening and got out of the car and tried to stop them. And we know this based on the recording that was found by the police. And he was like, "Whoa, what are you doing? Stop." And they said, "Shut the cunt, get back in the car," which he did. 17-year-old David's last words that were captured on the cell phone recording were, "I give you my word, I don't," before his sentence was cut short by Matthew Milat swinging the final swing in. He swung the axe and hit David in the back of the head, ending his life. 3 hours after his family sang him happy birthday on his 17th birthday, he was dead. After David was dead, all of the boys, including Chase Day, then drug David's body further into the Belangolo State Forest and covered him with a pile of sticks and brush, just like Matthew's uncle Ivan Milat had done with his victims before him. Matthew Milat was happy on the drive home. He was smiling, he was laughing, he was joking. Him and Cohen Klein talked about how much fun they had had and what an adrenaline rush they had gotten from murdering another person. The next morning, Matthew Milat woke up and realized, oh, I should probably get rid of all the evidence. So he went to this watering hole where him and David used to hang out, and he threw a bag containing his bloody clothes that he had been wearing that night, along with the murder weapon, the antique double-headed axe, into the watering hole. Threw it in there. Got rid of it. He was on a high though, man. He was stupid. He couldn't keep his mouth shut. He went and told other friends what he had done. You know, told them that he had killed their mutual friend David, and nobody believed him. They're like, okay, sure you did, sure you did. And he said coolly, "You know me, you know my family. I did what they do." Like a demon. Like a fucking demon. So David was not the only one talking, because back at home, Chase Day could not deal with what was happening. Apparently, the night of the murder, poor Chase Day had no idea what was going to happen. He, like David, thought they were just going to the forest to drink, smoke some weed, have fun, and celebrate. And he got much more than he bargained for that night. He quickly cracked to his father and told him everything that happened, and then they went to the police to then tell them everything what happened. And he told them everything. He even implicated himself by saying that he helped hide the body. He said that he helped them hide the body out of fear because he truly believed that if he didn't help them and make them think that he was on board, that they would have then killed him, like he would have been the next victim. Initially, he was actually arrested as an accessory after the fact, but those charges did end up getting dropped when they realized that he really had nothing to do with it. So November 21st, 2010, police get a call that a person has been murdered in the Belangolo State Forest and that the perpetrator had the surname Milat. And what a whirlwind. Can you imagine getting that call? Apparently, like, the officer initially thought that it was a joke because they were like, well, yeah, that happened, like, 15 years ago, but quickly they discovered that it was not a joke. The police quickly found out what you and I already know, that Matthew Milat had murdered his childhood friend. The friend he had known for years, the friend who always invited him into his home. The friend who continued to hang out with him as he got creepier and quieter and darker and more withdrawn. He had murdered his friend for no reason at all. No reason except for the thrill and for the perceived legacy that he would, inherit from his uncle's past crimes. David Octolone was dead, and his grandmother and grandfather would have to identify his dead body. Police quickly moved in and arrested both Matthew Milat and Cohen Klein, and the two were interviewed separately. To me, the way that they questioned Matthew Milat was really weird, or at least it's weird for like the way that questioning goes in America, because Matthew's grandfather, William Milat, who was the brother to Ivan Milat, was allowed to be present while questioning Matthew, which I guess sort of makes sense because of the fact that Matthew was only 17. But while questioning, like, they'd go to ask Matthew a question and his grandfather would be like, no, you're not going to answer that. And in turn, Matthew did not answer any questions. And it was so frustrating. I watched this interview and I just wanted to smack this guy in the head, but that's just me. But, even though he refused to answer any questions, it didn't really matter. Matthew's shoes had David's blood on them. The police had recovered the murder weapon from the watering hole, and Cohen Klein's cell phone footage had been found, and all of these things sealed Matthew's fate. And as for Cohen in his interview, he tried to play it off like he was in the exact same position as Chase. He tried to say that he had no idea what was happening. He thought they were just going to go party, that David was his mate and he would never do that. But the police had the cell phone video. And in this video, it was very clear that he was not an innocent bystander. He was a murder accomplice. Cohen had not only filmed the actual murder, but he had started filming prior to the murder, and he filmed both he and Matthew talking about their plans, talking about what they were gonna do, talking about what they would do if David tried to run, and talking about just how pumped they were for Matthew Milat to become notorious like his uncle Ivan. Are you notorious, Matthew? Notorious for being a little baby back bitch is what you are. Both boys pled guilty once they realized that there was no getting out of this. The evidence stacked against them was just far too strong. Matthew did try like one last ditch effort to try to like get in the good graces with the court, and he sent a letter to the judge saying just how sorry he was and how he wishes he could take back murdering his friend. Matthew said he didn't know why he did it and that he wished that he'd wake up and it all would have been a dream, but this was stupid. Apparently letters weren't the only thing that Matthew was writing in prison. He was also writing poetry about just how freaking dope murdering David was. I'm going to read you now a small portion of a poem that Matthew Milat wrote after murdering David Octolone. I can see you start to sweat, wondering what you're gonna get. Hoping 4-1 in your head, cunt, I'll put it in your leg. How far are you gonna get? Your match, cunt, you have just met. Stumbling all over the place, hear the crunch of leaves and feet, feel your heart skip a beat. Are you gonna get away? No hope, kid, this is your day. The day that you will not be found 6 feet underneath the ground. Yeah, real sorry, Matthew. I think it's safe to say that Matthew didn't feel bad. Matthew wanted to kill someone, so he killed someone. He planned it out, then he drug it out. He murdered David, he recorded the murder, and then he bragged about it later. So the boys pleaded guilty, and with all the evidence, it was a pretty open and shut case. The video recording could not be disputed, and unfortunately, this video recording was played at the trial while David's family was there. I can't even imagine what that must have been like. And I read a couple places online that the family wasn't warned in advance that this was going to be played, but I couldn't find that on like a lot of sources, so I don't know if it was true. But either way, can you imagine hearing that? That would be so traumatizing. David's grandparents honestly just seem like destroyed, dude. Like, his grandma was saying that she believes that both boys should have gotten life in prison, and she hopes that they rot in jail, obviously, reasonably. His grandfather says that he can never forget, he can never forgive, and he hopes that someday someone balances karma's books. Which I get, because I hear a lot of times where people say that they like forgive the people who murder their loved ones, and I don't know, maybe these people are religious. I can't understand that mindset because I've never been there, but I do not believe that I could ever forgive somebody for murdering somebody I loved. I just don't think I could do it. I'm not that big. I mean, I'm big, but I'm not that big. In May of 2012, Matthew Milat was given a life sentence, which I believe is 43 years in Australia, and he has to serve a minimum of 30 years before he is up for parole. The justice who presided over the case said that the murder was unimaginably cruel, brutal, and violent. Of course, he tried to appeal this, but his appeals were denied, stating that the term was not excessive for the crime. He will be up for parole in 2040, and apparently this is the longest sentence that a juvenile has gotten, had gotten in 30 years prior to his sentencing. I also read online that in Australia, it is customary to give a 25% reduction on one's sentence if they are to give an early guilty plea, but in this case, they waived that because they said that Matthew was such a danger to the community. Cohen Klein was initially given 32 years, but he appealed and got it reduced to 27 total years, and he will be up for parole in 2030. And that, my friends, is the story of the murder of 17-year-old David Octolone, who was tragically murdered by his childhood friend, 17-year-old Matthew Milat, who was the great nephew of notorious Australian serial killer Ivan Milat, the backpack killer. Isn't it just so fucking sad? Like, okay, I even told my husband about this one, and I don't tell him about the cases that I cover because he could give a shit. He could not give a shit less about true crime. It's not his thing. He's not interested. But with this one, I had to tell someone. I don't have any friends in my actual life that like true crime or that I talk to often that like true crime, and I had to tell someone because, dude, it was like, he's 17. That's a baby. That is an actual child. It was his birthday. He was killed by his friend, like somebody he trusted. His family had this piece of murdering dog shit in their home and let him eat at their table. Like, I cannot even imagine what that was like for his family. And they recorded it so that they could like look back on it later and like, you know, get off on it. I don't know. It's just, it just seems so incredibly pointless, and I don't actually believe that Matthew had a real reason to kill David specifically. I think he wanted to kill somebody, and David is who he chose. Now, why did he choose David? I have no idea, and I doubt that we will ever know. Maybe he was jealous that David was so well liked and popular and like easy to get along with and not a fucking total loser murdering creep, or maybe David did say something about Matthew. I mean, teenagers talk, like people talk, but is it a reason to kill him? And in such a brutal way? No, obviously no. This kid was just a loser baby pansy who needed some attention and was just like Jill, the killer in Scream 4, spoiler alert, who just wanted to piggyback off some sort of perceived fame and like attention that they believed they deserved simply for existing. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you enjoyed it and that you found it informative and that it gave you all the information you would want on this case. I, did a lot of research on it, and I'm happy to bring it to you. I really wanted to give you a Christmas Eve video and, like a little Christmas present, because it's something I would want. Like, from all the people that I watch, because I am a YouTube watcher, I would love it if somebody would put out like a bonus video as a Christmas gift. So that's what I wanted to bring to you. Please make sure to join the Brad Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell, because I put out new videos every week and I would love to hang out with you. And I know I never mention it, but you can also follow me on Instagram. It's Braderstein, just like my namesake here. I am super active on there, especially on my stories. I'm always posting polls and like spoilers of upcoming videos, and I'll ask you like which one would you want to see next, stuff like that. So if you would like to take part in that, you're more than welcome to follow, because it's free, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. You're tight. This is tight. Merry Christmas if that's something that you celebrate, and I hope to see you in my next video.